The Uyghur situation in China. At least on the internet, there's a lot of discussion whether or not there is a genocide against the Uyghurs in China. For people who don't know, the Uyghurs are the second largest Muslim community in China, which are Turkish descent. The largest ethnic group that is predominantly Muslim in China are the Hui people, which are Chinese-speaking adherents of Islam who are already a mixed heritage of Chinese, Turkish, Mongolian, and other Asian ethnic racial groups. But this is not the focus here. The focus is that did China have concentration camps and Uyghur against the Uyghur people? Some people who are, let's be honest, most anti-Chinese from both left to right will say yes without question, but there are people who try to defend it and say no, there is no concentration camp or there is no genocide. Although there is a cultural genocide, they're trying to assimilate into the Chinese culture, which I am against, at least if you count what is the original definition of a genocide. But the focus is, do they have genocide or not genocide? Do they have concentration camps in Uyghur? Well, according to Chinese owned sources, right, if they indicate that it's amount to a police state, and they basically admitted they have concentration camps. According by the communication by the Communist Party of India, which is the dominant party that controls the state of Kerala, Chinese concentration camps for Uyghurs in China's own words. In the past few years, there is increasingly disturbing reports about China's internment camps for Uyghurs in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region of China. There have been credible academic studies as well as journalistic reports documenting the systematic incarceration of the entire nationality/ethnicity in the name of a war on terror. China and Chinese media have claimed that these reports are distortion by Western media and Western nations' interest in discrediting China. Information on the issue tends to be from ideological polarized sources, so like so many issues in today's world, there is a tendency to take position based on ideological camps rather than facts. Every report in the BBC, New York Times, or Washington Post can be dismissed as fake news and Western propaganda, while likewise any report from Xinhua or Global Times can be called Chinese propaganda. How should we, on the communist or the Marxist-Leninist left in India and the world, view the matter? Marxists had to look at any matter from the perspective of facts in the highest principle of the rights of people and of oppressed communities. No one should choose to believe or disbelieve facts, or support or oppose oppression based on camps in the global world order. There is no doubt that in the US and its allies have vested interest in isolating China and also in spreading a variety of racially motivated xenophobic material which has many takers in India. But that cannot mean that those who are firmly opposed to any such US/NATO agenda make no independent assessments/criticism of China's policy and its treatment of dissenters, minorities, and oppressed nationalities. In fact, it's important that if right-wing discourse is attacking China, and a consistent left must assess and critique China's policy from a thoroughly Marxist vantage point. Even at the height of the Cold War, the CPIML made its own independent assessment and critique of the Soviet Union from a Marxist perspective, rather than taking stance based on Cold War camps. The CPIML also opposed the Tiananmen Square massacre. We point out the fact simply did not support the claim that the protesting students were all part of right-wing pro-capitalist plot and that regardless nothing could justify the massacre of protesting students. In August 2009, Liberation carried a piece by Armin Sen titled Mao Zedong Done and Ethnic Cleansing in Xinjiang, outlining the Chinese stand divergent from Mao's emphasis of opposing Han chauvinism in dealing with contradiction with minority nationalities. Of the current situation of the Uyghurs in China, Liberation attempts to separate the wheat from the chaff by closely and critically reading China's own official public white paper under Uyghur policy. In their official response to leaked documents and other reports in various news outlets, we scrutinize these official positions and responses to the Chinese state and ruling regime to see if they match up to the principle of upholding the rights of people and oppressed communities that we on the left demand from any regime. So does China policy toward the Uyghur people stand up to such scrutiny? China's 2018 white paper on Uyghurs. After a period of denying all reports of the existence of internment camps for Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region of China changed course and decided not only admit the existence of such camps, but to justify and even boast of these camps as a successful model of fighting terrorism. In March 2019, the State Council Information Office of the People's Republic of China published a white paper titled The Fight Against Terrorism and Extremism and Human Rights Protection in Xinjiang. This position paper can be accessed on the official website of the Chinese government. This paper began with a long discourse on terrorism and stating that since the 1990s, especially in the wake of the September 9/11 terror attack in the US, separatist forces aiming to establish Xinjiang as East Turkestan, separate from China, have been indulging in terrorist activities there. The paper cites several of these instances. Marxist-Leninist principles demand that we try to identify and address the material and political basis for militancy rather than to blaming it on outside forces or on religious extremists. For instance, we remind our fellow Indians that the Indian state cannot be allowed to get away with the claims that militancy in the Kashmir Valley is a product purely of Pakistani interference or Islamic extremism. There are genuine political grievances and that the Kashmir people have, and militancy is primarily a product of the refusal of the Indian state to admit or address those grievances. For militancy in Kashmir, Manipur, or Nagaland, their historical and political grievances are root, compiled by Indian state brutal and repressive policy of treating entire communities in these regions as potentially terrorists. The Chinese government paper on Uyghurs does exactly the same as what the Indian state does, blame militancy of outside interference and religious extremists. On August 2009, Price Analysis and the issue underlying Uyghur resentment and alienation. Why does the Chinese state not reflect on their own failings in addressing the root political issue and failure to win the confidence support of the people of the Xinjiang province? It's also interesting that while the Chinese state blamed all the criticism of its Uyghur policy on Western capitalist propaganda, its own policy document echoes the US/NATO war on terror propaganda and policy, a fountainhead of Islamophobic state-sponsored violence, complete with the invocation of 9/11 as a watershed moment. Policy, a community in the name of preventing crime. Across the world, from black communities in the US to Indian policy in Kashmir, Manipur, Nagaland, and Pastar, repressive states have labeled entire community as prone to crime or terror to justify intrusive surveillance and state terror against people of those communities based on their identity against people of those communities, not on crimes committed by them. Sawat Jutum in Bastar is one instance where the Indian state justified acting to displace and imprison entire Adivasi village in the name of preventing Maoist terror. The white paper makes it clear that the Chinese state does much the same, treating the entire Uyghur population as prone to religious extremism and terrorism and justifying mass incarceration of Uyghurs in re-education camps in the name of preventing terrorism. The UAPA on steroids. So what is the legal basis for the Chinese state to send vast number of Uyghur people to such camps? What is the legal basis for judging that the Uyghur individual is in need of re-education? The counter-terrorism law of the People's Republic of China attempts to cover its own back by stating that no one should be targeted on the basis of any specific religion or any identity. But this is how the government white paper described the scope of the law under which persons can be sent by people's court to the de-radicalization centers. In the course of counterterrorism and de-radicalization, the local government forbids any organization or individual from using religion to split the country, spread religious extremism, incite ethnic hatred, undermine ethnic unity, disturb social order, harm citizens' physical or mental health, hinder the implementation of the country's administrative, judicial, educational, and cultural systems, or harm national security, national interests, public interests, and civil rights and interests. It prevents ill-intentioned people from using religion or religious activity to create disorder or commit crimes. Nearly every word in this paragraph is vague and open to arbitrary and subject to interpret by the state. For instance, there is no clarity on how the law distinguishes spreading religious faith from spreading religious extremism. If a religious preacher advocates abstaining from alcohol, for example, he is spreading faith or extremism. If a Uyghur person speaks about Han Chinese majoritarian domination or imposition of the Mandarin language, is he or she guilty of undermining ethnic unity or disturbing social order? If a Uyghur person wears a beard or observes a fast during Ramzan, are they hindering implementation of the country's cultural system? How does the state distinguish ill-intentioned people from well-intentioned ones? All in all, the counterterrorism law of the People's Republic of China is like India's draconian UAPA or its predecessor POTA and TADA on steroids, a handy tool which empowers the state to surveil and criminalize the most innocent and ordinary of actions, especially if the said actions are committed by a religious minority or ideological dissidents. Imposition of the Mandarin Chinese language. As Indians, we are acutely aware of the sensitivities and sensibilities of various nationalities and ethnicity regarding language. We are also aware how Indians fascists seek to impose hegemony in the name of Hindi linguistics and Hindu religious supremacy. India has witnessed and continues to witness mass protests in Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Assam, Karnataka, for example, against the imposition of Hindi. Likewise, for the Uyghurs and other minority ethnicities in Xinjiang region like the Mongols, language is a key, precious and sensitive part of their identity. Imposition of the Mandarin Chinese language, the language of the Han Chinese that constitute the majority in China, is resented and seen understandably as an attempt to erase the Uyghur culture and identity. The white paper repeatedly stated that the Xinjiang people's weak command over the Mandarin Chinese language made them less capable of telling right from wrong, illegal from illegal, which is inherently racist. The vocabulary of the white paper implied that the Uyghur people are uncivilized and childlike, and the need to be civilized by being taught Mandarin Chinese and the rule of law. The white paper is prepared by a disturbing number of references to how rural residents in Xinjiang had tendency to become criminals because they are weak in the use of the standard spoken and written Chinese language, slow in acquiring modern knowledge, and have a poor communication skills. And thus such people are more inclined to be incited or coerced into criminality by terrorist extremist forces. But what is most disturbing about this reading, this white paper, is that it is document China has made available in the public domain. The Chinese state feels no qualms or hesitation about declaring such racist stereotypes as its official policy. This policy determines the speaker of ethnic minorities' own language as slow, non-modern, and poor in communication skills, and therefore prone to crime. It is reminiscent of the Criminal Tribes Act in colonial India. Reading these passages, there is no doubt that the Chinese state official policy seeks to humiliate and criminalize the language, culture, and the entire communities of the Uyghur people. Note: Chinese state policy openly sees knowledge of Mandarin Chinese as a test of patriotism. To put this in perspective, if the Modi regime were, in an official policy document, to declare knowledge of Hindi to be a test of patriotism, or conversely a lack of knowledge of Hindi as a proof of a lack of intelligence and criminal/terrorist potential, it will easily be recognized and resisted as a fascist policy of enforced homogenization. Mass displacement/forced labor. White paper refers repeatedly to transfer employment as a job policy for Xinjiang region. It speaks of implementing the plan of transfer employment for 100,000 laborers in southern Shenzhen in 3 years, 2018 to 2020. Have we realized the transfer employment of 75,000 people and transferring 8.305 million surplus rural laborers for employment in Shenzhen from 2016 to 2018. What exactly does transfer employment mean? Do the laborers have any choice in the matter where they choose to work, whether or not they could like to transfer? There have been reports of China relocating thousands of Uyghurs from Xinjiang in western China to factories across the country where they work under conditions that strongly suggest forced labor, producing for a variety of global brands including Apple, Nike, Amazon, Samsung, Zara, H&M, Microsoft, Mercedes-Benz, and Uniqlo. Is this policy of transfer employment forced labor? This question can only be decided by the Uyghur workers themselves. If they could answer in an environment free of fear of loss of liberty, all we can say based on the official documents and statements of the Chinese state is that such an environment certainly does not exist. Does, does China deny the authentic or leaked documents? Now we can come to the document leaks reportedly by someone from within Chinese regime to the New York Times newspaper in 2019. The first thing we at Liberation did was to check whether China questioned the authenticity of the documents. The answer is no. A report titled Western Media Report of Shenzhen Lacks Morality. The Global Times, the international version of the Chinese Communist Party's People's Daily newspaper, date 17 November 2019, wrote that the New York Times disclosed more than 400 pages of leaked files from Northwest China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region and maliciously attacked China's government in Xinjiang. The use of the word disclosed suggests that the Chinese state and the CPC are not denying the authenticity of the documents. The same report merely blamed the critical analysis of the said documents by the New York Times on Western public opinion used their value system to criticize the vocational education and training center in Shenzhen. This very notion of the Western value system, which is distinct from an Eastern one, is a racist and colonial trope, embraced and regurgitated by right-wing ideologies in both the supposed East and West. The Indian far right, for instance, denounced Marxism and communism itself as a Western value system. The report, after claiming that Shenzhen sites are now free of terror and crime, asks a question: how many people in the world would oppose such a change in their own cities and prefer to live in the so-called democratic and free society where extremism prevails and terrorism is rampant? Repressive regimes across the world, including that of India in Kashmir, justify restrictions on liberties and democracy as necessary sacrifice in exchange for safety, welfare, and development. We may call to the right to privacy verdict in India, which rightly observed that refrain to the poor need to know civil political rights are concerned only with economic well-being has been utilized through history to wreak the most egregious violation of human rights. Above all, it must be realized that it is the right to question, the right to scrutinize, the right to dissident, which enables an informed citizenry to scrutinize the actions of government. In the voice of the Global Times, the Chinese state effectively admits that Xinjiang under their rule is neither democratic nor free. But if you hold democracy and freedom to be a vital component of any substantive safety, welfare, and development, the Chinese state dismisses you as being an advocate of Western value system. Note that the Chinese state does not claim to be upholding a socialist value system as opposed to a capitalist or imperialist one. There is a relief, since any socialist value system should by definition have higher standards of democracy, human rights, freedom, and social liberty than the ones held by bourgeois capitalist democracies. The Thought Police. The leaked document read as though there were pages from the dystopian novel 1984 by George Orwell. Students returning to Shenzhen from campuses in other parts of China for summer holidays are dismayed to find their parents, grandparents, or other relatives missing. The document laying down instructions and detailed question and answer script for local government officials, explaining the protocol for responding to the students' anguished questions. First thing that strikes one is the document repeatedly refers to the camp as concentration education and training school students. Naturally, this is a translation from Chinese to English, but China has not claimed there is anything wrong with the translation. so it seems clear that China is an internal document effectively admits to holding Uyghur people in concentration camps. The Q&A script makes it very clear that peoples are being detained in camps without having committed any crime at all. For instance, in reply to the question, did they commit a crime? Will they be convicted? The script reply is, if they haven't committed a crime and won't be convicted. But the script repeatedly used the dehumanizing language of lack of health, infection, virus, disease, malignant, and tumor to describe the condition of the incarcerated Uyghur persons. It is just that they're thinking of being affected by unhealthy thoughts if they don't quickly receive education and coercion. They will become a major active threat to society, to your family. It's very hard to totally eradicate viruses in thinking in just a short time. It needs to be dealt with like a detox for drug addicts. The script warns the student that their own conduct can affect the amount of time for which their relatives are detained. Family members, including you, must be abide by the state law and rules and not believe or spread rumors or take an active part in collective life. Only then can you add points for your family member, and after a period assessment, they can leave the school if they meet course completion standards. The script also indicated that camps are no less than prisons. In reply to the question, can my family member ask for leave to visit me? The script offers the reply, this is strict regulation and concentration training behind closed doors. In general, leave won't be granted while they are in training and study. If you want to see your family member, we can arrange for you to see them through video. The document also prescribes strict surveillance and censorship of the student and their social media posts and direct thought guidance to indoctrinate these students, warning that returning students from other parts of China have widespread social ties across the entire country. The moment they issue incorrect opinion on WeChat, Weibo, and other social media platforms, the impact is widespread and difficult to eradicate. It is clear from this that the Chinese state is the top police, decide which opinions are incorrect and which openly and unashamedly claims the authority to tell students what to think. The document claims that they are providing jobs and vocational training to improve their lives on the incarcerated person is undermined by the fact that many detainees had careers as scholars, civil service, and entertainers and are being detained as punishment for their incorrect thoughts. He refused to round up everyone who should be rounded up. The document leaked to New York Times revealed that in August 2016, a hardliner named Chen was transferred from Tibet to govern Xinjiang. Chen issued an order to round up everyone who should be rounded up. This vague order made it clear that one criteria for being rounded up were entirely arbitrary. One official, Wang, who ordered the release of more than 7,000 camp inmates, was punished by being detained, stripped of power, and persecuted. His confession, in which he wrote, presumably under duress, that without approval and on my own initiative I broke the rules, was publicly read out to officials in Shenzhen, but the real reason for his punishment was hidden in secret internal report which was among the leaked documents. The report said that he refused to round up everyone who should be rounded up, a phrase that could have come straight from a pen of Orwell. The New York Times article of the leaked document can be read on Indian Express or another parts of the internet or the official website of the Chinese Communist Party. Islamophobia and double standards. Remember when Trump instituted the Muslim ban, banning immigrants or refugees from certain Muslim-majority countries, associate those countries with terrorism? That policy was rightly protested for Islamophobia and racism. The Chinese state document displays a similar Islamophobia. The Q&A script cite a question frequently asked by students about their incarcerated relatives: why were Xianxin residents being detained in camps for traveling for 2,000 Muslim-majority countries, including Turkey and Saudi Arabia, using passports issued by the Chinese state? The reply: because they have visited countries where religious extremism is very serious and they may have come under its influence. The dangers are immense, and soon as the buzz of religious extremism appear, that's why it's really necessary to put them from legal system, education, and patriotic education after they return. The Global Times report cite above state that some areas in southern Shanxi are sensitive to chaos and terror because they are bordered by Pakistan and Afghanistan. The double standard and hypocrisy of the US when it comes to attacking China on the question of Islamophobia, civil rights, racism, and detention/intercamps are obvious. But the hypocrisy and double standard of countries like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey in supporting China's Uyghur policy are also glaringly obvious. Among the more than 50 countries that are signed into the letter endorsing Chinese governance in Shanghai are the same Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. The Chinese state document is associated with terror and religious extremism. So, Uyghur persons are persecuted for visiting Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Yet Pakistan and Saudi Arabia support this persecution. Turkey under Erdogan is busy repatriating Uyghur refugees to China to face certain imprisonment and possible death, using the underhand means of first allowing them to be extradited to third country. Pakistan and Turkey are very loud on the violation of human rights of the people of Kashmir by the Indian state. Why are they silent and complicit in violation of human rights of the Uyghur people by the Chinese state? We do not have to look further than China's own document and its own propaganda organs to recognize that the Chinese state is holding vast amount of Uyghurs in concentration camps, suspecting the entire Uyghur community both inside and outside the camps to force indoctrination, surveillance, and censorship, attempting to erase the identity and culture of the Uyghur people. China has been touting its Xinjiang model as a successful model of counterterrorism, which the world should adopt. Certainly, Narendra Modi and his fascist regime in India will be happy to adopt China's Xinjiang model for Kashmir and for minorities and dissenters of the whole of India, lock, stock, and barrel.